It's looking to be a very grim, dark fall, a very bizarre fall. And that's because it's looking like college football is not going to happen in the fall. But while college football is not going to happen in the fall, or doesn't appear going to happen in the fall, and as I stand, several major conferences have said it's not going to happen for them. Others are still trying to forge through, but it's not looking likely for college football in the fall and probably shouldn't happen in the fall. But then there's conversations of college football happening in the spring, of the spring being very, very exciting if the fall is going to be so dark. Well, on this episode of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and across the Now Network and all our platforms, I'm your host, Mike Asti, as always here, and I'm going to let you in a little secret. College football in the fall is great, but college football in the spring, it's not going to work. It probably won't happen, and if it does happen, it's not nearly going to be as exciting as college football in the fall, and it actually relies on the National Football League needing to cooperate to really occur at all, and that's very, very unlikely. As someone who covers the National Football League every day, let me tell you, that is just also not going to happen. Now, of course, you have the little war between major conferences, and there were non-major conferences that announced this first, giving them their credit, but that didn't make the noise, okay? If a tree falls in the woods, it's not going to make a sound if it's a non-Power 5, let's put it to you that way. And if it doesn't make a sound, it's not as relevant. That's just the reality of the situation. But the tree has now fallen in the woods that's going to make a sound in college football. Major conferences now, the Pac-12, etc., they're saying they're not going to do this. There's not going to be college football, the Big Ten, of course, as well. There's still the SEC, there's still the ACC, there's still the Big 12, and two of those three, WVU with WV Sports Now, of course, Pitt in the ACC, across the Now Network here. We're still covering college football. We're still covering the preparation for college football. It's across our two affiliate sites covering those teams because those conferences have kind of made it clear they're still trying to go through this. They're still trying to do this, and they certainly by rights could. The conferences do operate independent of themselves. They could have their conference championship. Weirdly enough, maybe they somehow would still be able to crown a national champion, even though those other conferences aren't going to participate and just get those top four out of the major conferences that are left. Or who knows if UCF wants to somehow, and I threw this joke out there on Twitter, they somehow want to crown themselves champion again and claim another championship that certainly wouldn't be legit. But of course, this would be a tainted season in some way without those other major conference teams. However, it could still happen, but saying it doesn't happen, let's hypothetically act like there's not going to be college football at all in the fall, or even if there is, the other conferences have made it clear they're not going to have college football because there is that war right now where the SEC really wants everyone to stand with them and go forward. I don't know if it's a political move or it probably just a money move, certainly in those states and those schools. But speaking as if there's not going to be college football in the fall, or at least not for those other major conferences, and there's going to be some attempt for the spring, that conversation that currently right now is very popular. Well, number one, and as I said in the open, it does rely on the National Football League. And like it or not, the NFL is not going to cooperate with you. They're not going to move their schedule. I covered them through the quarantine, the original quarantine, the pandemic, the first week or so, the first month, the second month, the third month. It all seemed like 1 month. However, the National Football League that entire time made it clear, the people like me that cover the league, we're not going to have our break. We're not watching Netflix. We were busier than normal. And it wasn't just because you had the NFL draft going on. That certainly was part of it, and I'll get to that end in a second. But it's because the NFL made it clear they're going to try to be safe as they can, but they're not moving their calendar. They don't want to move their offseason calendar. They don't want to move the regular season calendar. They're powering through. Go to SteelersNow.com. You'll see it there. They're powering through. We're busy as ever. They're not going to stop. They're doing Zoom sessions rather than in person. They didn't let their players meet each other as early as they would have liked. It makes it harder on new players going to new teams, or on rookies for sure. We might see sloppy football in the beginning of the season. But regardless, they're playing some football. It might not be great football. It might be sloppy football. It might be tainted football. Who knows? Fans may be there. Fans may not be there at all. They may have a reduced 15,000 situation in those stadiums, which is looking likely. Ribfest at Heinz Field canceled. No, nothing's going to be a celebration. However, they're going to try to play these games. And they're not going to be bubbling because obviously there's some complications for the National Football League to be able to do that with so many players on those teams and just the intricacies. It would be more difficult. They're not going to bubble. They're going to play. That appears to be the reality. But that's a problem for the college football because college football is going to rely on the National Football League to move their calendar if they want to go into the spring. Number one, they can't go head-to-head because it's not just one league competing with the NFL, which would in general be stupid for ratings. But even if they didn't care about that and college football is mightily popular, they may certainly snag some ratings if they did go head-to-head. I don't think that would be their concern. They wouldn't be worrying like, say, the NHL would have to worry, even Major League Baseball, if somehow they went against a behemoth that was the National Football League in terms of ratings. The NFL may try to play every freaking day if they could. It's the fact that they have a strict calendar. It's a necessary calendar. They're not going to move off of it. And that would mean that if you're trying to play college football in the spring, what are you going to tell legit NFL prospects? Any NFL prospect, anyone at all involved with college football, this might even be a coach thinking something into the future, but certainly players. If you are an NFL level player, if you believe you have NFL hopes in your mind, and all those dreams don't come true. They're not all legit. We've seen top draft picks crash and burn. But they get paid, and that's the goal for many of them, to use college as a stepping stone to get that money. Set up your family for generations, as well as maybe wanting to play in the NFL, of course, and having success and continuing on in your career. But anybody with any dreams of really being drafted at all, of any money coming to your family, certainly a career for yourself, certainly the star players, certainly the normal Heisman candidates, okay? You're not going to play. Or I'll tell you right now, you want some advice, take it or leave it. You shouldn't play. You should opt out. You're probably going to opt out because you're going to realize that you can't be actively playing college football while NFL teams are going to try to recruit you, while NFL teams are going to be looking at you. It would be a legality nightmare because you certainly can't be an amateur player, quote unquote, not getting paid. And that's a whole conversation for another day. But if you're an amateur player, if you're a student athlete, you have to be done. You have to have your eligibility over to then be eligible in the National Football League. That was a whole conversation many years ago with Maurice Curlette and others like him. So you got to be done with college football at a certain level to even be eligible to the National Football League. You certainly can't hire an agent and be talking to NFL teams while you're playing on Saturday. That just doesn't work. That's not going to work. And really, even if those rules were moved because of, say, COVID, say they adjust things because of COVID, they don't worry about your eligibility as much. They allow you to talk to an agent when they wouldn't have before. Okay. Maybe they'll throw that adjustment in there for COVID, even though I'm sure they wouldn't want to do that, and it probably would not happen. Hypothetically, say they do that. You need to be prepared. There's a lot of preparation that goes in there. Look at any of my past shows on Pittsburgh Sports Live in terms of talking to a former NFL player, somebody who went through that process, and Mike Logan, anybody at all, Doran Dickerson, who I've had on, and talk about what happened with him and how that was. Anyone who speaks on how that was, of course, was not a college football player or an NFL player, but anyone out there who you may have heard throughout our channel or just in general who speaks on how that was, it is an entire process. You can't be in the middle of playing games on Saturday and be worrying about that. You need to be done with that part of your life. Okay, there's a reason why it happens afterwards. There's a reason why the college football schedule normally goes head-to-head with the NFL and then they end it. And this is obvious. There's just a concern for injury. Even if everything else wasn't true or teams weren't going to hold that against you as much because of COVID and they changed the rules, if I'm a GM and they really do their due diligence now more than ever, players who even have a chance at an injury may drop in the draft. If you literally get hurt because you're playing right before the draft, or here's worst case scenario, because again, college football is going to be a several weeks, several months season like it normally is, I'm assuming, unless you're going to cut that schedule. But say they play the regular schedule and do it in the spring, it just wouldn't work unless the NFL cooperates because, and this is the main issue, the draft would be over, and you still potentially would have bowl games. You still would have some games. Even if you scrap the bowl game and just do the playoff, those are generally the star players that are really going to be drafted high by the National Football League. The NFL is not going to draft someone and then say, hey, next week go ahead and play college football. That'll be fine with me. No. And yes, we already have players who skip bowl games in preparation for an NFL draft, so maybe you'd see more of that. But that would just jam things way too together, and you'd have no time. It would reduce your time from stopping to play a sport to then getting to know your new team, talking to your new coaches, getting into training camp, learning your new NFL playbook, which is totally different than college in many respects. We all know that. It would really put you behind the eight ball. It would make your level of success way reduced. And it would make college football, here's the other main point, it wouldn't be nearly as entertaining. It wouldn't be as exciting as you may think in the spring. The flowers would be blooming. It would be sunny outside. You wouldn't have probably as many cold, bitter days at those stadiums. You may still have some rain, I'd imagine, depending on where you are. And certainly nothing likely would get snowed out, depending on when you start that. However, it wouldn't be as exciting. All those star players, for the reasons that I just named, because of that need to keep to that NFL schedule, if they have NFL hopes, even a glimmer of NFL hopes, whether they're legit or not, they wouldn't play. They probably shouldn't play. It wouldn't make sense for them to play. Anybody advising them would probably tell them not to play. All they could really do is hurt their draft stock, certainly if they got hurt. If they got hurt, even if the schedule somehow was moved in the NFL to cooperate a little bit, if they got hurt and then they played 3-4 weeks, then they weren't going to play the rest of the season. They just want to showcase themselves. Okay, maybe that would happen with some. It would make a beginning of the season exciting. What if they get hurt? Their rehab, their time to be healthy, it would be screwed in the draft. At least if you get hurt in the first half of a college football season, normally in the fall, you might be able to rehab yourself and get healthy and still be drafted where you think you should by the time the draft rolls around the National Football League. So if the NFL doesn't cooperate, which they're not, the excitement level wouldn't be there. And honestly, how is that even going to make sense when you have certain conferences playing in the fall, certain conferences playing in the spring? Are you going to crown 2 national champions, one out of a couple conferences in the fall? They have their conference titles. They somehow create a top 4. Then they go ahead and do that same thing in the spring. I mean, we're living in a world here, and granted, I hear you that college football has probably never legitimately crowned a national champion, that there's not an asterisk around or somebody's going to complain about. For many, many years, teams could just go ahead and basically claim titles just willy-nilly, and they would not nearly play each other, nor, could that happen with so many teams, but they would just claim titles. Half the time they wouldn't make sense. Half the time they would have multiple losses in a season. Sometimes they didn't even win their bowl game. And then we got into a situation. So a lot of those are certainly in flux. A lot of teams, and there's one I could call out now that I won't on this network. But there's a lot of teams that just they're not really holding legit national championships. And then we have the BCS, which computers are involved. A lot of teams feel they got screwed there. You go to the playoff now, there's still teams that feel like they unjustly got left out of that playoff because right now you're only taking 4. We know the whole UCF mess. Granted, their schedule, for me, didn't garner it, but I'm public enemy number 1 with UCF fans every time I say that. So I get it. There's a lot of controversy over all the national champions, but this would be the prohibited most controversial national champion ever, national champions in a year calendar time, even though maybe one would be 2020 in the fall, the other would be 2021 somehow. And then what about the next 2021 in the fall? Are there 2 national champions that can say they're 2021 national champs, one in the spring, one in the fall? It would be a mess. This is a mess. College football also, I saw Chase Claypool, the Steelers rookie, call college football out for this, all these conferences out for this, even the ones making the right call in their eyes, and I guess it's an individual, but even it's probably not something we should be doing. So even the ones making that decision, they've taken a long time to decide it. These guys are making this decision while there are teams, and you can see it throughout the Now Network, as I said, on Pittsburgh Sports Now and WV Sports Now, that are preparing for a season, and now they want to cut the cord. This does screw the players. This does hurt the players. College football is normally a peak of your mountain. 99% aren't going to play in the National Football League. And as I said, now it'll be more difficult. So I get it. But I don't think anybody's saying they get that it's going to screw the players. They feel bad for those players. They're also not saying that they want there not to be college football. That's something else we gotta dispel right now. No matter what political opinion you may have, nobody wants there to not be college football. Okay, people want to have college football. It's really, really popular. I could say everybody wants to have college football because it's so popular. So nobody wants there not to be college football. That's not a thing that anybody's hoping for. And I get maybe some are think they're glad they can be right, but at the end of the day, they love watching college football. College football is really, really popular, and nobody wants there not to be college football. But it's not looking likely for college football at all in the fall. Even if you have it a little bit, that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't work. These conferences, these major conferences, even though they can work independently of themselves, need to be working together. They should all make one decision. This should have been discussed by the presidents of those major conferences all together. None of these conferences should have announced these decisions until they all discussed it and they all were going to be on the same page. But of course, that's not how things ever work with college football. Really, it should almost be every conference, not even just the Power Five. They should all be together on this, even though they're not together really on anything else. Certainly the major conferences should have all been together on this one situation and made the announcement together. Had it just be a firestorm of announcements, it should all be the same. But college football not happening in the fall, the doom and gloom of college football in the fall, and as much as that will suck for the fall for all of us, whether it be media covering and making part of their living off of college football or sports in general, or just fans who like consuming college football and having a beer on a fall day, looking at pumpkins on their porch, carving some pumpkins, having a brew, pumpkin spice, something probably in the house, a game on, no matter what. It's not going to happen this year. Probably not going to happen this year. It may happen in the spring. It shouldn't happen in the spring. It's going to suck if it happens in the spring. It's going to be a worse product. It won't be as exciting as you think it'll be. And it really doesn't work. It doesn't work unless the NFL cooperates. The NFL is not going to cooperate. And I don't think it works just in general product-wise because you're going to have so many players that will opt out. And those players should opt out if they have any hopes at a future beyond college football, which right now is non-existent or reduced, I would say, at best. Again, this was another Radio Gold edition or a Visual Gold edition, whatever you want to call it here throughout our channel of Mic Drop. And I want to make sure that you are aware to hit up all the Now family of networks. Of course, I'm sure you are right now. But if you're new, Pittsburgh Sports Now, covering Pitt, covering the college scene, also in Pittsburgh. So Duquesne, Robert Morris, also throughout high school. That's a whole nother question. Could be a whole nother show. High school having sports, having high school football, if college football doesn't happen, that looks asinine. That looks ridiculous. Of course, SteelersNow.com, heavily involved there. Steelers, they're forging ahead. That's going to happen. They're in their training camp, as weird as that is. You can actually hit up one of my recent shows to let you in on a little secret and pull back the curtain on what Steelers coverage is like in the midst of COVID-19. Pittsburgh hockey now, of course, now into an offseason. Penguins didn't get the first overall pick. They lost to Montreal. A lot of fallout there. What'll be the future of the Penguins? Pittsburgh soccer now, even now Pittsburgh golf now that Geika's got up and running. I just enjoy we can still go out there on the course, even though our governor didn't allow us in the beginning of quarantine. So I'm happy to have that if we get nothing out and nothing else these days. And, of course, WV Sports Now, one of our newer sites, but now about a year in, that in golf now, throughout the Now Network. And that's just a killer site that's really just on fire. We'll see. Again, they're covering a team. They're covering the Mountaineers. Football, basketball, it right now appears happening. Who knows? At least their conference wants to move ahead. Also, the rest of the scene down there in Morgantown, about an hour south on I-79. I'm familiar there, of course. Anyone who knows me, find me on Twitter at MikeAsti11 on Twitter. You can also find these shows here, of course, Pittsburgh Sports Live, and make sure to subscribe. Bottom of the video there's a button, there's a bell. Click it. It'll make it easier for us to get this content to you, and you won't have to worry about following us anywhere else or hitting up all those slew of sites, which, you know, there's a method to our madness while they're all separated. That'll be a secret I won't let you in on. But regardless, make sure to subscribe. Bottom of the video there. It'll make it easier for us to get this to you. You get a notification anytime there's a video on this channel, whether live or uploaded. Join in through our chat sometimes, whether it be during or after the show. Feel free to comment down below, comment on this video. I'll try to answer back. I do make a point to do that. Also, pghsportslive.com for the website form of Pittsburgh Sports Live. You can get all these shows, all the video content there in website form, kind of an archive for us there, even though we don't promote it as much, pghsportslive.com. And also follow us on social, Pittsburgh Sports Live on Facebook, Pittsburgh Sports Now on Facebook, WV Sports Now on Facebook. I'll throw that out there because they're college football affiliates. At PGH Sports Now, of course, on Twitter, at WV Sports Now on Twitter, and at PGH Sports Live on Twitter as well. I'm there, again, helping promote this channel at PGH Sports Live on Twitter. So it doesn't look good for college football. This decision should have been uniformed amongst all major conferences at the very least. It could be very, very weird to have all these multiple champions that none of them would really be legitimate. And the excitement that you may feel wanting college football in the spring and those conversations, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work, and it really shouldn't happen. It would not be a quality product. So you either do it in the fall, and that's not looking like that's happening, or you scrap it for a year. We're not nearly as ahead as where we should have been with COVID-19 or where we think we should be. So you try to get better there. That's where the world should focus on. Then you come back to sports later. And right now, the excitement over college football may be happening in the spring. I don't want to pop your balloon, but it's just not going to work.